And often they would be able to produce photographs which clearly showed that it appeared that the quasars were not only near the spiral galaxies, but connected in some way with gaseous filaments and dust filaments that went from the spiral galaxy directly to the quasar and ended right at the quasar. So this became even more of a big problem, that not only were they associated with spiral galaxies, but they were also connected with them through filaments. So, of course, the people that were noticing this, by this time, this is about in the 1960s and the 1970s, of course, because they were going against the established dogma, which you see that these so-called pseudo-scientific theories, which have the properties that they can never be falsified in the sense that, such as the Big Bang, in the sense that they happened so far in the past that no one can ever really know what happened, that just as in religions, when someone goes against the accepted dogma, they're persecuted, they're shouted down, they're in every type of way made to seem insignificant, or that they're lunatic fringe or something like that. But of course, they tried to do this to Halton Arp and to the other researchers that were noticing at the time that the whole theory was blown apart because these objects with gigantic redshifts were relatively close by, and that this threw off the entire theory. There were basically two ways that they were calculating the distance of other galaxies, the size of the universe, the distance of different objects within the universe, was through the redshift, and also the pulsating stars, or the Cephids they're called, which I talked about last week, how just recently through observational data that they have shown that these Cephid stars do not have the mass that they thought, which that is the other way that they were knowing the distance of different. It was all about that they had concluded what the mass of these pulsating stars were according to the rotational velocities, et cetera, they would determine the distance of different objects that these variable stars were located in. So the two things that they have to measure the distance of objects in the sky and the size of the universe and the entire thing are the redshift, which has now been proven false because of the quasar problem, and the pulsating stars, which was just recently proven false because of some more experimental data that they've taken in, and some of the Cephids they've been studying were on the proper line of sight, so that they can actually determine the actual mass, and all these things were completely way off from what they had thought. That the two methods that they had of determining all this are wrong. So at this point, it may not be filtered down to the ordinary person. It may not filter down to them for 100 years, but they have no way of knowing the distance of objects in the nighttime sky, what the size of the universe is, whether it's actually expanding or not. And according to the theories and the philosophical treatise of Karl Popper, that this theory needs to be immediately thrown out once a scientific, even this is not even really a scientific theory because it's no way it can ever be proven to be false, but because it happened so far in the distant past. But whatever experimental data they feel like they've accumulated thus far has been proven false, that this theory needs to be completely abandoned right now. It's not a question of adjusting the theory or tweaking the theory or adding some constant or some equation modification. That the theory at this point has been proven that there is no experimental data for the Big Bang, and that it should be completely scrapped and started over with. But they're not going to do this because it's never been a scientific theory. It's a religious dogma. It's a creation superstition. It has been forced on the masses. And so we can get into that a little bit later, why it's been forced on the masses, why it is for 100 years that it won't filter down to the ordinary person, that this is nothing but a lie, that there's no experimental data to uphold the entire system. So again, we get into that the Big Bang and the current theory of cosmology is nothing but a religious dogma, and that other viewpoints, just like when we have religious fanatics, that any other viewpoint is just rejected out of hand. And also we have, going hand in hand with that, the university graduate grant system, which it used to be that scientists would make a name by going against the system, by discovering something new, by putting forth a new radical theory. This is how scientists used to make their name in the world and how they came to prominence. But in the last 100 years, with the advent of and the prominence of the university grant system, that scientists now, the only way to really make it in the scientific world, to get the grant money, to get research funding, to get tenure and all these things, is you have to go along with the system. It's become like a club, more or less, where everyone has to abide by certain rules, just as a religious dogma, and if you don't, you're considered to be a heretic, and that you won't get the funding that you need. You'll be fired from your position. So the whole thing has changed in the scientific world from in the past, or 100 or 200 years ago, where scientists were expected to come up with something new, where people were expanding their thoughts and their imaginations as to the possibilities. Now you have to work within strict guidelines, and the only way to stay within the club, to stay within the system, is to present data that confirms that system. So it's neither objective, nor is it scientific, nor is there anything to even prove the current cosmological theory of the Big Bang. And there's many scientists now that are trying to speak out against this. They've come forth with different types of proofs and evidences that the quasar problem cannot be solved by just a coincidental line of sight explanation, that the quasars, and they have many more clear pictures now that they've been studying it, that the quasars seem to be something that is generated from the center of the spiral galaxies and then ejected from them, as with the electric sun or the electric universe theory, that the center of the galaxies is where the power is being generated, and that power is then distributed in a type of electromagnetic transmission system throughout the entire galaxy. The quasars tend to back this up, that they are created almost like proto-galaxies, and that the galaxies are actually, they're like living entities, that they are creating new galaxies almost like their children, that they are then spinning off and putting out new, fresh galaxies into space. So, of course, now there are different scientists that, and most of them have to say that we don't, we're not saying the Big Bang Theory is false. We're just saying that this is what happens, because they know that if they start to say, well, this obviously proves, because the redshift of the quasar is so much greater, there has to be other properties involved, because the redshift of the galaxy that they're coming from is so much smaller, and they're right next to each other. So this completely blows apart the theory. But most of them are afraid to say that. They're just rather saying that at this point, this is what the observations show. We're not trying to say anything about whether it proves or disproves the Big Bang Theory. There are a few that do that, and they're more or less ostracized from the system. But there is a lot of research coming in that backs it up. So at this point, everything is in question, really, with the current cosmological dogma. The size of the universe is in question. The theory of stellar evolution is in question. The Big Bang Theory is in question. So, but the ordinary person doesn't hear about any of this, and they are never ever able to find out the truth for at least 100 years until after all these things. And it will take the creaking wheels of so-called science so many years to turn the ship that it has to be, we have to try to understand, why is this? Why do they do this? And my belief is that these things are used as a weapon against mankind and against our consciousness. That if the Big Bang is true, and that everything came from nothing, it completely writes out the need for a creator from the scene. So rather than, these things are promoted and put forth by the manipulators of human consciousness and the manipulators of human society in its current form is to keep people in darkness. It isn't even about science. It's not about understanding the nature of things. They only put forth theories that seem to make the universe impersonal, that make us insignificant within that universe. And that anytime anyone discovers something that can put a creator back into the situation, or that makes the universe seem more accommodating, or that our consciousness is somehow connected with the universe, and that it has a big effect on how things are operating within the universe, that we're intimately connected with the stars and the sky and the planets, and that we have an effect on them and they have an effect on us. These people are immediately rejected out of hand. So I believe that current cosmology, which now at this point has been proven to be a fraud, that there is no evidence for it. So why is it that they would continually perpetuate this system? There has to be a reason for this, because it's definitely not about science. If science is the quest for knowledge, this has nothing more to do with the quest for knowledge. Rather, it's the perpetuation of a dogma. Why are they perpetuating certain dogmas over others? I believe it's to keep people in ignorance. I believe it's to keep people in darkness. I believe it's to keep people in confusion, and that this is the main purpose of scientific dogma nowadays, is to make the universe seem inhospitable, vast, uncaring, mechanistic, impersonal, that we are just a tiny speck of dust that can just be eliminated at any point without any consequence, and that no one in the vast scheme of the universe, it will never even be noticed if we are wiped out of existence. I believe all of these things are there to keep people in a degraded state of consciousness so that they never realize their full power. So in that sense, I think that it's important to look at some of the ancient systems and try to understand that these ancient systems were much more empowering, that they were much more so-called user-friendly to the individual, that they helped to explain our connection with the cosmos, that they helped to explain what was beyond this cosmos in terms of the spiritual realities, which have been completely wiped out now in the current systems. So I'd like to talk about some ancient, in the time we have left, I'd like to talk about some ancient cosmological systems, primarily focusing on the Vedic system, and how this will be much more empowering, how it's actually, if the source of the knowledge is reliable, then this knowledge is reliable, and that it can help us understand our actual position within the cosmos and our connectedness with the cosmos, our spiritual destinies. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is things that many ancient cosmological systems have in common, and try to understand that why is it that all these different cosmologies from around the world, whether they be Chinese or Indian or African or Asian or North American or Scandinavian, why do they all seem to have certain characteristics in common? It would only mean one. It can only mean two things. Either one, that the world in the past was united in a perfected civilization, in which, because not all of the cosmological systems agree on every point, but that doesn't matter, because different aspects or different features of the different parts of the planet Earth may have been entrusted with different types of knowledge. Just like in the university now, we see that there are different departments of knowledge. There's physics, there's chemistry, there's biology, there's microbiology, there's all the different sciences, and each department comes with its own specific viewpoint. So I believe in the past that under the Vedic system, where in the past that the yugas were that it speaks of ancient civilizations in the past, previous to 5,000 years ago, that were united in a perfected government and a perfected world situation of interconnectedness, of communication between the different parts of the world through yogic power, through great masters, through highly advanced technologies, that different parts of planet Earth were entrusted with different parts of the ancient knowledge, and